She was known as Jolly Jane, a smiling, sociable nurse in late 19th century Massachusetts, beloved by her patients and trusted by families. But beneath her cheerful surface lived a mind consumed by darkness, a woman who didn't just kill, but took pleasure in every drawn-out, breathless second of it. Jane Toppan didn't murder out of anger or desperation. She did it for the thrill, for control, for something deeper, something darker. She held her victims close as they died, watched their eyes glaze over, listened to their final gasps like lullabies. And when she was caught, she confessed to 31 murders, but hinted at many, many more. This is the story of a woman who weaponized kindness, wore a nurse's cap like a mask, and set out with one chewing goal: to kill more helpless people than anyone who had ever lived. This is the story of Jane Toppan, the angel of death. Jane Toppan was not born Jane at all. She entered the world in 1854 as Honora Kelly, the daughter of Irish immigrants in Boston. Her mother died of tuberculosis when she was still a child. Her father, an abusive alcoholic, known in the neighborhood as Kelly the Crack, slid further into madness. People would later whisper that he once sewed his own eyelids shut with a needle and thread. At the age of 6, Honora and her sister were abandoned at the Boston Female Asylum, a grim institution for unwanted girls. The records described them as being rescued from a miserable home, but from there, the Nora vanished into the system, just another forgotten child. 2 years later, she was taken in as an indentured servant by the Toppan family in Lowell, Massachusetts. Though never officially adopted, she took their last name and left her birth name behind, along with everything it reminded her of. But trauma has a way of following quietly. When the Toppan's daughter Elizabeth became like a sister to her, Jane's darkness was already beginning to take shape. A need to be loved, a need to be in control, and a growing curiosity about life and death. By the time Jane Toppan entered nursing school at Cambridge Hospital in 1885, she had already learned how to wear a mask. To her instructors and fellow nurses, she was bright, cheerful, and eager to help. Her easy smile and warm bedside manner earned her the nickname Jolly Jane. No one saw the experiment unfolding behind her eyes. It started small. She was curious about the effects of certain drugs, particularly morphine and atropine. Both were commonly used at the time, often administered by nurses with minimal supervision. Jane began adjusting the doses, changing the amounts just slightly, watching how her patients responded. They slipped into confusion, unconsciousness, stillness. She wasn't trying to kill them, not yet. At first, she was simply observing, learning. She kept careful notes, sometimes falsifying medical charts to cover her tracks. Her victims were usually elderly and already unwell, people whose deaths would raise no alarms. But then it escalated. She began keeping patients under her control for hours, drugging them into semi-conscious states where they drifted between life and death. She liked to be alone with them in those moments. She would lie in the bed beside them, hold them, whisper to them. And when they slipped away completely, when they died, she felt something powerful, something euphoric. It wasn't about mercy. It wasn't about curiosity anymore. Jane was beginning to understand that she liked watching people die. She liked causing it. By the time she moved to Massachusetts General Hospital in 1889, Jane had already claimed her first victims. But in a busy hospital full of sick people, death was just a part of daily life. No one questioned her. No one stopped her. She was a rising star in her field, beloved by her peers, and completely unnoticed as the body count grew. When she was eventually dismissed for reckless use of opiates, it wasn't for killing, it was for being sloppy. And even then, she faced no consequences. Jane simply pivoted. She left the hospital setting and became a private nurse. That's when the real spree began. As a private nurse, Jane Toppan no longer had hospital supervisors or fellow staff looking over her shoulder. She was free to choose her patients, to enter their homes, to become part of their families, and she used that trust like a weapon. In 1895, she killed her first confirmed victims outside the hospital. Israel Dunham, her elderly landlord, and shortly after, his wife, Lovely. Both had trusted Jane completely. They had no reason to suspect the smiling nurse who brought them tea was slowly poisoning them to death. And from there, the pattern grew more sinister. Jane didn't just kill to satisfy her twisted desires. She began to manipulate entire households. In one case, she poisoned a housekeeper just enough to make her appear drunk, then used the moment of chaos to get the woman fired. Jane took her job and later killed the family she had maneuvered her way into serving. She poisoned people for power, for convenience, for jealousy, and sometimes just because she wanted to. In 1899, her foster sister Elizabeth, the woman she had grown up with, died suddenly after spending time with Jane. It wasn't a mystery to Jane though. She had carefully poisoned Elizabeth. The reason? Jealousy. Elizabeth had married a man Jane once loved, and that was reason enough. By the turn of the century, Jane was fully in control of her double life. To the outside world, she was still the friendly, reliable nurse with a wide smile and impeccable references. But behind closed doors, she was orchestrating death after death, choosing her victims, planning her doses, and savoring the moments as they slipped away. And then she met the Davis family. In the summer of 1901, Jane Toppan moved in with the Davis family in a quiet seaside village in Massachusetts. She arrived under the guise of compassion. Mattie Davis, the family matriarch, had recently passed away, killed, though no one knew it yet, by Jane's hand. Jane offered to care for Mattie's grieving husband, Alden, and their children. Within weeks, Jane began dismantling them. First, she turned her attention to Alden. She poisoned him slowly, allowing him to weaken day by day, all the while she remained faithfully by his bedside. Then she killed Genevieve, one of the Davis daughters. Then Edna, Alden's sister. Then Minnie, another daughter. 4 family members, all dead in just over a month. Jane moved quickly, keeping up appearances, tending to the dying with a gentle hand, always the picture of sorrow and concern. But Mimi's death struck a nerve. Some in the family began to suspect that something wasn't right. A toxicology test was ordered. The results came back. Poison. The local police began to keep a close watch on Jane until October 29, 1901, when Jane Toppan was arrested for murder. The smiling nurse who had slipped through every crack in the system had finally been caught, but no one was prepared for what she would confess to next. In the days following her arrest, Jane Toppan confessed to 31 murders, but that was only the beginning. In a statement reportedly given to her lawyer, later leaked to the press, Jane claimed that her true victim count was much higher. Over 100 people, she said, had died by her hand, and she spoke of her crimes not with regret, but with satisfaction. She explained how she would drug her victims into unconsciousness, then revive them, only to let them die again. The process gave her a rush, something she described in chillingly calm detail. Under questioning, she admitted that the experience of watching her patients die, of holding them close and feeling their bodies grow still, gave her sexual pleasure. One newspaper wrote that she would fondle her victims as they died. Her motive was unlike anything authorities had seen. Not greed, not revenge, but lust, and a craving for power over life itself. Jane said she hoped to kill more helpless people than anyone, man or woman, who had ever lived. In the history of American crime, very few killers and almost no women have ever spoken so openly about murder was a source of pleasure. And Jane Toppan wasn't finished speaking. She wanted her story to be heard. She wanted the court to see her as fully aware of her actions, rational, calculating, and always in control. Because if she was declared sane, there was still a chance, however small, that she could one day walk free. But her confession had been too complete, too disturbing. She'd been too open about the pleasure she took in killing. Psychiatrists described her as insane beyond doubt, and the courtroom agreed. On June 23, 1902, Jane Toppan was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to the Taunton Insane Hospital for life. She would never stand trial for the full extent of her crimes. Inside the asylum, Jane lived out the rest of her days. She reportedly remained cheerful, still that jolly Jane, even as the years passed and the world forgot. Nurses said she rarely showed remorse. She spoke openly about her murders. Sometimes she even laughed about them. She died there on August 17, 1938, at the age of 84. She had spent nearly 4 decades behind the walls of the hospital, and even in confinement, she never once admitted she was wrong. Jane Toppan remains one of the most prolific and most chilling serial killers in American history. She killed more people than many of the infamous names that came after her, yet her story is still relatively unknown. Maybe it's because she didn't fit the mold. She wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in alleyways. She didn't hide in the dark. She wore a nurse's uniform. She smiled at grieving families and offered comfort with one hand while slipping poison into tea with the other. She blurred the line between caregiver and killer, between affection and annihilation. In a time when women were expected to be passive, nurturing, and gentle, Jane Toppan was methodical, dominant, and driven by a twisted form of desire. Her crimes challenge the way we think about evil, about sanity, about what it means to look someone in the eye and see nothing but control. And though she died in obscurity, she left behind a terrifying legacy. Not just in the lives she ended, but in the questions she raised. How many others like her have walked among us, smiling, helping, and waiting? Jane Toppan didn't just kill. She made death her art.